走到地方，呜呜呜，嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣嘣，然后我的 commander，嘣，然后就哗哗，然后就啊，然后我呀啊。
Two Chinese citizens fighting for the Russian military were arrested in eastern Ukraine, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky releasing a video on April 8th via X. The video shows one of the captured Chinese soldiers, his hands bound, attempting to communicate with Ukrainian soldiers in Mandarin. He appears to be explaining how he fought on the battlefield and the details of his capture. On the same day, Zelensky stated that Ukraine had summoned a Chinese Communist Party diplomat to demand an explanation. Zelensky added that Ukrainian forces had obtained the two Chinese citizens' identification, bank cards, and personal data. The Chinese nationals were arrested in the Donetsk region. He wrote on his post, "We have information suggesting that there are many more Chinese citizens in the occupiers' units than just these two. We are currently verifying all the facts. I have instructed the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine to immediately contact Beijing and clarify how China intends to respond to this." Zelensky did not disclose whether Ukraine believes these Chinese individuals were acting on orders from Beijing. At the same time, Zelensky emphasized that Russia's involvement of countries like China in the war highlights Russian President Vladimir Putin's unwillingness to end the conflict and his intent to prolong it by any means. Zelensky also called on the United States and European allies to respond to the matter. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha stated that after Ukraine's forces captured the two Chinese citizens fighting on the Eastern Front, Ukraine summoned the CCP's charge d'affaires on April 8th. Sybiha said that Chinese citizens participating in the Russian invasion of Ukraine calls into question Beijing's declared stance of peace and damages China's credibility as a responsible permanent member of the UN Security Council. According to the Associated Press, the Ukrainian forces engaged with 6 Chinese military personnel, ultimately capturing 2. If confirmed that these individuals were sent by the Chinese government, China would become the third country after Iran's provision of offensive drones and North Korea's contribution of personnel to provide military support to Russia. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce commented on April 9th that the United States had received reports of Ukraine's capture of 2 Chinese citizens fighting for Russia, calling the news disturbing. Bruce added that the CCP is a main sponsor of Russia's war, and stated that Beijing has provided Russia with dual-use products. Zelensky's video of the captured Chinese soldiers quickly spread on Chinese social media, sparking heated discussions. Ukraine thought China would side with them, but China is supporting Russia. Fearful expressions, obsequious demeanor. Mercenaries come from every country. They'll sell their lives for money. Nationality doesn't matter. I wonder how these people got there and what their purpose was. If it were me, I would definitely raise a white flag and join Ukraine to fight. Zelensky's political astuteness gives Trump a knife at this stage. CCP has been secretly organizing veterans to go to Russia and fight. Some also commented, we could call them volunteer soldiers, just like before. During the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, China sent troops under the guise of volunteer forces to support North Korea, many of whom were captured soldiers from the Republic of China. In other words, they were forced onto the battlefield. Notably, Zelensky personally raised the issue with the CCP, making this moment even more sensitive. U.S. President Donald Trump, after taking office on January 20th, quickly reached out to Russia in an attempt to end the Russo-Ukrainian War. On February 12th, Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and on March 18th, the two held another phone conversation to discuss negotiations to end the war. However, both Russia and Ukraine have shown inconsistency in cooperating with the U.S. Despite 2 temporary ceasefire agreements on Black Sea shipping and energy facility attacks brokered by the U.S. last month, both sides have accused each other of violations. The war continues. Russian President Putin effectively rejected the U.S.'s ceasefire proposal earlier this month, sparking discontent from President Trump. The CCP has also taken action. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, on February 15th, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with Ukrainian Foreign Minister at the Munich Security Conference. Wang emphasized that China and Ukraine had established a strategic partnership in 2011, and that their bilateral relations were developing normally. Chinese state media footage showed Wang at the press conference stating that China and Ukraine had long established a bilateral strategic cooperative partnership. He also added, "Some countries may not know this, so I will reveal this fact in front of the reporters." Due to the CCP's ambiguous stance on the Russia-Ukraine war, subtly supporting Russia's invasion, Wang Yi's comments have drawn ridicule from both domestic and international netizens. Ukraine says, "I don't know either. Has the wind changed? Why didn't you say this before? Is this for real?" Some netizens criticized, "You don't condemn the invasion of your strategic partner and instead claim to have unlimited back-to-back cooperation with the aggressor. This is defensive tone, using words such as, 'We have already established,' 'maybe,' since you've established a strategic partnership, but in reality, you're overwhelmingly supporting another unlimited strategic partner. What does this mean? Why didn't you condemn when North Korea sent troops to aid Russia? Why don't you send troops to support Ukraine? An ally stabbing you in the back, eye-opening." When meeting with the Ukrainian foreign minister, Wang Yi also claimed that China has always been working for peace and promoting talks, among other things. Independent commentator Du Zheng believes that Ukrainian President Zelensky's release of the video showing the capture of Chinese citizens fighting for the Russian military is an act of humiliation towards Chinese President Xi Jinping and the CCP. It suggests that Zelensky can no longer tolerate the situation. China expert Yue Shan argued that the participation of these Chinese nationals in the war is tacitly approved by the CCP. The public display of these Chinese soldiers as cannon fodder for Russian invaders is a disgrace. But it is the result of the CCP's pro-Russia propaganda and brainwashing. Yue Shan said, "Can Ukrainians not recognize the evil face of the CCP regime? Chinese people are innocently being used." Earlier reports by the Wall Street Journal noted that while the Trump administration was pushing for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, the CCP had actively thought to play a mediator role, proposing a US-Russia summit excluding Ukraine, which raised doubts. The White House refused to confirm whether it received the proposal, simply responding that it was completely unfeasible. This situation is likely to have contributed to Zelensky's growing dissatisfaction with the CCP. While the US made diplomatic efforts for a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire, the CCP also began to cozy up to Ukraine. On March 6, 2025, Chinese ambassador to Ukraine Ma Shen-kun met with Ukraine's Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food, Koval, and the director of the Food Safety and Consumer Protection Agency, Kechak. The two countries signed a protocol for the export of Ukrainian peas and wild aquatic products to China, expanding agricultural trade cooperation. This agricultural cooperation comes amid the backdrop of the China-US trade war. On February 1, 2025, US President Trump signed an executive order imposing a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. On March 3rd, Trump signed another executive order imposing additional tariffs on China, prompting the CCP to seek agricultural products from Ukraine as an alternative to US goods. While China has continuously tried to shape an image as a peacemaker during the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the reality is that China and Russia had already announced an unlimited strategic partnership before the war broke out. In response, President Trump had previously called on Russian President Putin, saying, "We don't want Russia to align with the CCP." As the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire negotiations have stalled, and in response to Trump's public remarks attempting to divide Russia and China, the two nations have reaffirmed their unity. On April 1, 2025, Russian President Putin met with Wang Yi in Moscow. Wang Yi stated that China and Russia's cooperation was never aimed at third parties and would not be disrupted by external interference. He reiterated the stance of generation-long friendship, never enemies, between the two countries. Putin announced that Xi Jinping is expected to visit Russia in May 2025. Earlier, in February 2025, Russian ambassador to China, Morgulov, revealed that Xi Jinping had accepted an invitation to attend the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War Parade in Moscow on May 9th. Putin is also expected to attend the 80th anniversary of the victory in the anti-Japanese war ceremony in Beijing on September 3rd. Since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, China has consistently claimed to remain neutral, opposing military aid from the US and other Western countries to Ukraine, labeling such aid as pouring oil on the fire. China has also attempted to lead peace talks, urging Kyiv to accept the status quo of Russian-occupied Ukrainian territories to create conditions for negotiations. In 2023, trade between China and Russia reached a record high of $240 billion, surpassing the $200 billion target and increasing nearly 1.7 times from 10 years ago, despite a general decline in China's exports to other countries. During the war, China has also continuously provided Russia with large amounts of dual-use materials to replenish its military arsenal. Chinese companies have been accused of shipping large quantities of explosives to Russian military factories. In 2022, trains loaded with tens of thousands of kilograms of smokeless powder passed through the remote town of Zabykovsk on the China-Russia border twice, enough to produce at least 80 million rounds of ammunition. These explosives were reportedly shipped by China's state-owned Poly Technologies. The CCP has also been cracking down on domestic opposition voices regarding its stance on the Russia-Ukraine war. At the beginning of the war in 2022, several Chinese scholars, including professors from Nanjing University, Peking University, Hong Kong University, Tsinghua University, and Fudan University, signed a petition opposing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Their petition was swiftly suppressed and removed from the internet by Chinese government censorship. Vice Chairman of the Public Policy Research Center of the State Council, Hu Wei, wrote an article in early 2022 calling on the CCP to avoid tying itself to Putin, warning that maintaining superficial neutrality would not work in the Russia-Ukraine war. He said Beijing had no advantage in the situation and should align with the majority of countries to avoid further isolation. In February 2023, Hu Wei published another article in a major CCP-controlled media outlet, stating that Russia's great power status had diminished, and the CCP was facing a more dangerous external environment. He suggested that the end of the Russia-Ukraine war was becoming clearer, and the Beijing government had limited room for maneuver. Voice of America reported on October 4, 2024, citing informed sources that Hu Wei was being purged and required to retire immediately between June and September 2024. Retired Professor Gongfang Bin from the National Defense University of China and commentator Sima Pinbang have both faced suppression for questioning China-Russia relations and supporting Ukraine. In contrast, pro-Russia rhetoric online has been loud, and Chinese nationals fighting for Russia has not been considered newsworthy. The deaths of Chinese citizens in the Russian military's combat operations are not a new phenomenon. However, this time, Ukrainian President Zelensky's reaction to the capture of these Chinese nationals seems to have a different agenda. Earlier reports mentioned Zhao Rui, a Chinese mercenary born on July 20, 1985. He was the first Chinese national confirmed killed in the Russia-Ukraine war while fighting for Russia. Zhao died on November 29, 2023, in the village of Novoprokopivka during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. His death was reported by Russian media on December 27, 2023. Ukrainian media later released a video showing Zhao being tracked and killed by a drone while carrying water back to his camp. On August 14, 2024, 2 Chinese nationals reportedly died on their first day after joining the Russian army. One of the men shared a video stating that Liu Hongwei stepped on a landmine on the 11th, losing a leg before being killed by a grenade. The other, Liu Jie, was also killed by drones. 2 other Chinese nationals reportedly died the previous month. The video included a warning, "Hurry up and get back, there's still time. The summer offensive, survival time less than 24 hours. On October 19, 2024, 2 Chinese mercenaries, Old Wang and the Warden, went live, discussing the frequent errors of Russian commanders and the high casualty rate among Chinese soldiers. The Warden mentioned that 153 Chinese soldiers had died on his front, noting that North Korean troops suffered heavy losses too. By the end of 2024, the overseas whistleblower platform reported that a Chinese national fighting for Russia lamented that only 6 out of 421 volunteers remained, with 4 from Anhui province and 2 from the Henan province. On March 15, 2025, Chinese media figure Chai Jing interviewed a Chinese mercenary, Macaron, who was stationed at the Bakhmut front. Macaron shared that he had no strong stance on the war and initially viewed his role as just a job. However, after experiencing racial discrimination in training, he wanted to leave the army but had no choice. He was interrogated with his equipment confiscated and later sent to prison. In the interview, the Chinese mercenary Macaron stated that participating in the war went against his will and that he paid a heavy price. He ultimately admitted that when he entered a Ukrainian home in the ruins, he felt deep remorse for the civilians harmed, as his side had destroyed their homes and their homeland. After the interview, Macaron left the assault team, was injured in an airstrike, and was hospitalized. He expressed a desire to retire and end the war as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Russia has strengthened its military ties with North Korea, signing a mutual defense agreement, with North Korea sending troops to aid Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. In January 2025, Ukrainian forces captured 2 North Korean soldiers in the Kursk region. According to AFP, Zelensky stated during a press conference in Kyiv, "I think the United States should pay more attention to what is happening today." He added, "The North Koreans fought against us in the Kursk region. The Chinese are fighting on the territory of Ukraine. And I think this is an important point that we need to discuss with our partners, I think urgently." Last year, a rare instance occurred where a Chinese national died while fighting for Ukraine. Pastor Huang Chunsheng from Taiwan posted on November 10, 2024, that Peng Chenliang, known as Farius, a 29-year-old from Yunnan, was the only Chinese soldier in the Ukrainian army to be killed by artillery. Analysts believe that most Chinese nationals on the Russia-Ukraine battlefield are fighting for Russia, with very few supporting Ukraine. This reflects differing stances and values between the two sides, with many Chinese individuals being heavily influenced by CCP propaganda. As the war continues, the risk for Chinese nationals remains, and if they don't withdraw, they may continue to lose their lives.